So, so let me just see. Okay, so this is the talk, and and one of my co-authors is here, and I recognize Professor Giarlotta also. And like I told my co-author, I tell him, I hope this will not be a total waste of your time. So at least what we can have with all of this Zoom business, we can have some conversation going. And so, Jerry, you don't worry about the time business. Rather than I had many options. So let me put those options on the categorize them. One was, as in humanities talk, to take this paper and start reading. Just reading the paper and then reading through it by about 35-40 minutes and then waiting for questions. And during the reading, assuming there'll be no interpretation. Another version of the humanities talk is the paper is just introduced in 10 minutes, and then the entire 50 minutes are left for questioning of the paper. So there's a second option. The third option is to go back not to the humanities, but to the social sciences, and then present the model, and then take clarificatory questions as we proceed. And those who know the subject matter very, very well, to even take deeper questions as we proceed. So even before the model is presented, one can take questions of why do you model this way, and I can generalize your model, etc., etc., etc. So the typical social science economic seminar. And Jerry already talked of politeness and rudeness. The humanities seminars are typically very polite, and the social science seminars are typically not so polite, because you keep interrupting and say, this is a stupid problem, who asked you to solve it? So people have to first motivate themselves why this problem is interesting, and then how they solved it, and then in that solution, etc., etc. So instead of any of these options, I want to just begin a conversation and get to know the few people who are interested in this topic. And hopefully I can send them papers, we can start corresponding, and we can pursue this issue. So let me first start with, so this I just put, so this is in Istanbul. I am delighted. Thank you very much for this invitation, Sema. I am delighted to participate in this international symposium on economic thought, and the research platform on economic thought. Economic thought is not something that is emphasized, as you know. And speaking only from my parochial point of view, as an academician in America, the top 30-40 departments typically do not have a history of economic thought in their curricula. In my own university, which has a very strong humanities very strong humanities tradition, with the Humanities Center and so on, we do not have history of economic thought. Not only do we not have any course in history of economic thought, we don't even have any course in economic history. So in some sense, it is very interesting. We used to call at Johns Hopkins, we used to call ourselves a history of, we used to call ourselves a political economy department. And I think 1988 or so, we changed it to economics. And now we are a department of economics. Economic history is done at Hopkins, but it's done in the history department. Economic development and how shall I say, systems work is done in the sociology department. Political economy, both quantitative and non-quantitative, philosophical or social scientist type, is done in political science department, and then psychology. So in some sense, there is a deconstruction of our subject. Economics today is purified. So that's how I want to begin, if you like, this purification of economics. And I think this is not healthy for the profession. So that's my first punchline. So now let me go back to my title and reading, whining, reading Knight. So you have Knight's theory of risk, profit, and uncertainty. So that's a 1928 classic magnum opus of Knight. And there is a paper in 1950 by Rutledge Vining, which most of modern economists would not know. He has a paper in the American Economic Review 1950 or 1940 on reviewing Knight's essays, Freedom and Reform. So we are trying to read Knight's risk, uncertainty, and profit through Vining's lens. Why? Why don't we just take what is in this, take the model in 1921 and talk about that model? And if I'm interested in ethics, in history, in science, and I'm interested in economic theorizing, why don't I just talk about that model? Why don't I just talk about Knightian uncertainty? And if you go to Google citations and your various search engines, you will see several papers on Knightian uncertainty. And there is on my list a very nice, a very profound work of Frank Riedel and his associates on Knightian uncertainty. And it takes different values in economic theory. I am arguing against that. So this is, if you like, the first point of this talk. And the first point of this talk is a distinction between recruitment and retrieval. I do not want to just recruit Knight for my models. I do not want to valorize my models in economic theory by just using his name and thinking those models to get greater staying power or persuasive power or compelling power by calling them Knightian. I want to understand what Knight's contribution to economics was, or to economic theory was. So it is a process of retrieval. I am doing intellectual history. I am doing history of, I'm going back to Knight for his ideas. What did he have to say about risk, uncertainty, and profit? So it's a project of retrieval, not of recruitment. So this is the first point. I already mentioned intellectual history. Now I want to make the second point. I want to make the second point that I am doing this not only because I am interested, and presumably I am speaking for myself and for my co-authors, not only because we are interested in intellectual history, but because all of us are also interested in economic theory. And we cannot do theory without history. So that is the second point. So I am going back to Knight, not only for Knight and for intellectual history, for history of thought, but for economic theory. I want to understand problematics. I take the viewpoint, along with my co-authors, that a theorem does not stand on its own out of the blue. It was a response to a problematic. It addressed those problematics. It has a history of its own. Its meaning must be understood just as any text must be understood. Oh, but it's a theorem. It's in language. It's in, more importantly, symbols. So as such, there is no ambiguity. And there is a cumulativeness. You don't need to read theorems of the past, because the theorems of the present consist of all that is worthy of distillation of the past. They, in some sense, embody all the collective wisdom of the past. And that is a point of view which we are squarely against. A theorem too has a context. So I have already brought in recruitment versus retrieval. I have brought in history versus theory. I now want to bring a third thing on which Eddie Schley and I have written, a third point, if you like. I want to bring the methodological writings, and in some sense, the reason why it will, perhaps some reasons why history of economic thought has gone out of mainstream curricula. I want to talk a little bit about Stiegler's distinction. And Stiegler's distinction in a 1955 paper, and Stiegler was, quote unquote, George Stiegler at Chicago was the foremost historian of economic thought of our time. One of the authorities on Adam Smith and much else. And he was also a theorist. So he has a distinction. And that distinction is a distinction between textual exegesis and scientific exegesis. And I was recently reminded by David Mitch of the University of Maryland that, if you go back to his 4 or 5 page papers, he doesn't talk so much of textual exegesis versus scientific exegesis. What is in the title is personal or biographical exegesis and scientific exegesis. So you see, the word itself, exegesis, becomes very important, because exegesis is a word that comes from the register of theology, or from the register of reading religious texts, of sacred books. You pore over the syntax and the semantics of that text, and you go into argumentation as to what it could possibly mean. Economics is clear. Its meaning is clear. The mathematics is clear. Either it's correct or it's false. So what is this scientific exegesis? Why does Stiegler talk of scientific exegesis, as opposed to not textual exegesis, as David Mitch emphasized to me, but personal exegesis? What is this distinction that Stiegler is making, and that didn't really catch on in the profession? It caused a little blip for those who were at Chicago. Patinkin has some comments on it, and then the profession moves on. But it is a distinction that has done special damage to the study of economic thought. And remember, as I keep emphasizing, this is a symposium on the history of economic thought. So what did Stiegler mean? And he is very explicit, and Eddie and I make it clear by direct quotation in our essays. He is very clear that when you look at a particular thinker, be it Knight, be it Vining, be it Ricardo of the 19th century, be it Adam Smith of the 18th century, or be it Petty of the 17th century, when you get a thinker, you pick up all that is scientifically valid in that thinker's thought, and you discard the rest. In particular, you do not take care of biographical and personal details, however titillating they may possibly be. You are serious about science. So I have history, I have economic theorizing, I have ethics I have not talked about, but I have science. And it is scientific exegesis. So what Stiegler is trying to do is to do what I already objected to in the writing down of theorems. He is trying to do to economic theory. When you read Adam Smith, you take all that is scientifically valid in his thought and discard the rest. By discard, you discard it as an economist, as a literary figure, or as a critic, or as an important man of letters, bell letters, that may be of relevance. But as far as history of economic thought is concerned, it's not relevant. And this is a very, very problematic distinction. After this, genuine history of thought cannot be done because it has used history of thought as a handmaiden, as a servant of the power that be. It has conventionalized and domesticated history of economic thought. Whatever is scientifically valid, there is one objective evidence of what is science. That is our current criterion of science. You pick that scientific thing up and move it away. It is not so easy to just say this is nonsense, because at some level it is not nonsense. But one has to be a little careful about it. And here I now put a fourth idea into the picture. And that is this expression, Whiggish history. What do you mean by, there were the Tories and the Whigs of the 17th century politics, English politics. So there is this expression Whiggish or Whiggery, and it goes back to Butterfield in the 1930s, the teacher of John G. A. Pocock. And when you write Whiggish history, you are writing from a teleological point of view. You write it as an ascent, as a journey with a prescribed destination. You are looking at those aspects of the past that inexorably and inevitably lead to the present. It is domestication. It is a history of progress. Typically, doesn't have to be. It could be a history of downfall. It could be different points of view. But the thing is, again, you, the historian, is in control. It's your editorial power to decide how history is to be written. Then there is no point in doing history of economic thought. Because in some sense, you see, history of economic thought, the historian is not subservient to theory. They go hand in hand. They have to be in conversation with each other. But anyway, I have now gone on for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So I'm going to pause here and then move to my next slide. So let me just summarize this aspect of the conversation. I'm talking of Whiggish history. I'm talking of personal and textual exegesis. I'm talking of recruitment and retrieval. I am talking of science, whether science is fixed or science itself evolves. I am talking of mathematics, whether it is monolithic and whether mathematics is a language, as Paul Samuelson put in his famous epigraph to his foundations. And if it is a language, is it then open to all the, if you like, slippages or frailties of language? It is no longer an objective medium. So there is a reason why we can do history of economic thought. So let me pause here and ask you if you have any questions, and then I move to the second slide in my second set of ideas.
I would say just keep on going. This is very interesting.
Oh,
I have some thoughts, but I'll bring them up later.
Okay, don't worry. I will keep enough time, and I will not try to monopolize my 1 hour. I have, it's about, over here, it's about 2:26. So I'm keeping my eyes on the clock.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so now I wanted to, this is why I'm delighted to be part of this symposium. I'm delighted to encourage this, and I'm sure my co-authors are too. So I took this from Sema's email to me, and it is a forum for academicians. And I attach importance to academicians, you see. So academicians to present and discuss economic thought. And then there is this very interesting methodology, theory, history, sociology, philosophy, policy. One could say politics. Politics. Economics not neutral. It's very important to have economics as part of your political platform. You understand economics as a politician. So there are a lot of these various, if you like, different imperatives on history of economic thought. It is a weapon in some modern sense. So there is politics, sociology. So in a sense, I can best encapsulate what I'm trying to say, and my co-authors have heard it ad nauseum. What is this category, not of science, but of economics? And to what extent is politics and sociology and anthropology and psychology part of it, imbricated in it, gives it its identity? What is the difference, if you like, between an economy or a society or a polity or a community? What's the difference between an individual and a social? What are these categories? If we are to understand what is it that we are doing in economic theory, and by economic theory, I mean highbrow economic theory, middlebrow economic theory, in theorizing, so that we can apply to policy. What are we doing? So that's another preliminary remark. And now comes this distinction, you see, and it's a famous distinction between Oakeshott. It's an Oakeshott distinction in 1970 in his book on human conduct, because you're trying to understand the phenomena for us. So now comes this distinction between a theorist and a theoretician. So a theorist or theory or economic theory is the unconditional pursuit of conditional learning. Conditional learning. If certain hypotheses hold, then this follows. It's conditional. but it's an unconditional pursuit of conditional learning. You try to change as many ifs as you can and get as many thens as you can, because the ifs are being abstracted from the phenomena that you want to explain, and then is the conclusion you want to derive, to apply to the phenomena you are interested in. So that is a theorist. So what's a theoretician? Theoretician is in some sense a practitioner. He takes these models and he puts them into practice. He tries to persuade and compel and institute policy and build consensus. He is the modern Democrat or the Republican. He or she explains how economics works. What economics? There is only one economics, but there is no one economics, because economic theory is if-then. So you pick a particular if and then you apply the then. And better still, why do you want to get into mathematical economics or history of economic thought? You just pick the then and forget the if. What does that mean? The free market. Why do you need to formalize the free market? The growth of the capitalist system. Why do you need to formalize the growth of the capitalist system? You look out of the window. You know markets exist, and you know markets are a good thing. You look out of the window. You know how we have evolved to our present status. It was because free markets brought us here. It is because rugged individualism in America brought us here. So what is the if and the then? There's only the then. We now put it into practice. We put it into policy. So in some sense, this animus or hostility to history of economic thought has a parallel in an animus and hostility to mathematical economics. And your response would be, are you kidding me? Look at any journal, any mainstream journal. An economics profession is a profession that loves to have top 20 this or top 5 that. Look at those journals. They are full of mathematics and they are full of data. So what animus are you seeing? What visions are you seeing? There is no such animus. And I have been told this by my distinguished colleagues. He said, what? There is no such thing. There is no mathematical economics because we are all mathematical economists. No, you will have to go back to understand our point of view, or the point of view that I am trying to articulate here. You will have to go back to Oakeshott's distinction of unconditional pursuit. The mathematics you see in the journals is by and large mathematics that has been authoritatively approved. It is a way of doing things that is the domesticated one, that is the conventional. When you want to think of a particular way of handling uncertainty, this is the way you handle uncertainty. If you want to handle a particular way of how an individual makes decisions, this is the way you handle it. And to be sure, I am looking at this in a very dogmatic way. To be sure, new mathematics do come in, new models do come in, but there is resistance. So in some sense, that resistance is muted and minimized if there is no history of thought. And there is no mathematical economics. There is mainstream economic theory. The problems are decided upon. Approaches to the problem are decided upon. Certain tracks on which you are to travel are laid upon. You say, are you kidding me? You obviously have a conspiratorial disposition. There are no such tracks. You just do. If it's original and you are good enough economist, you can publish in Econometrica or in the Journal of Mathematical Economics. But I tell you, think of why some models are in fashion and some models are in the shade. And the answer must go back to the if and then. So I want to pause a little bit more here on the if and then. And I want to pause here on the if and then to talk about theorizing and the difference between analysis and description. And this is a very problematic description. You see, we are analytical economists. We make a model and we analyze it. We just don't describe reality. Describing reality is what humanities people do. Humanists do. Scientists don't describe, they abstract. But you see, in any abstraction, certain things are included and certain things are left out. And there is no theory, no scientific way to decide what is to be included, what is to be left out. Look at my abstract. What does it say? It says, we read Whining Reading Knight's Truth and Freedom and read it as Knight anticipating and elaborating, blah, 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 blah. What has been included? What has been excluded? What has been blinded out? And what has been given salience to? The abstract may have abstracted from the inessentials and focused on the essentials. Or it may not. And that's where you need this unconditional pursuit of conditional learning. And that is where you need the history of the profession. You need our traditions. You need to be rooted. You need to make sure that your problem remains within a particular context. And you need to be clear what is your register in which you work. Is it a social register? It is an anthropological register. Is it a political register? Is it a historical register? It is a mathematical register. And within those registers, there are again dichotomies, ladders, which you will throw off once you have climbed to where you want to climb. And so now, let me move over to some other.
Professor Ali, I'm sorry. This was a 30-minute session. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you that in the first place.
This way, if you give me 2 minutes, I will just show you 2-3 more slides to show that this was supposed to be an honest talk and that I had prepared things and I was not just shooting off. But like I said, the whole point
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
The whole point of these Zoom meetings is to start. So there is my Oakeshott, and there is Hayek, and there is Cameron on how to read, and there is Samuelson, Arrow Debro in 3 decades. And there is a fancy abstract with my co-authors' names blazoned on the cover. And there is the structure of the talk, and it went nowhere like the plans of mice and men. And then we have the structure of whining. So why don't I stop here? I thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to stop, but thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we didn't get to have more time to discuss this. But we will continue this outside of the context of this.
I hope very much to keep in touch with you.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you all very much, and have